When I first moved into the building, I honestly didn't expect much more than a place to sleep and maybe a little peace after a long day. I was done with loud roommates, unpredictable landlords, and cramped spaces where even silence felt expensive. But this place, it felt different. Tucked on the third floor, the apartment had this gorgeous little balcony that caught the morning sun just right. It was quiet, private, and it made me feel like for once I had control over my surroundings. That balcony became my sanctuary. At first, it was just a few pots, a little rosemary here, some mint there. But as the weeks went by, I started growing more. Tomatoes, lavender, bell peppers, even a small lemon tree in a large container I picked up from a local nursery. It was something to care for, something that didn't argue back or demand anything unreasonable. And it smelled amazing. Every morning I'd step out with my coffee, barefoot, and just breathe. Dirt on my fingers, the rustle of leaves in the wind. It gave me a kind of peace I hadn't felt in years. Neighbors would walk by and compliment the setup. "Looks like a tiny jungle up there," one said. Another even asked if I could help them start their own little herb corner. It felt good, like I belonged to something, a rhythm, a ritual, something human. For a while, everything was quiet, peaceful even, but then she moved in. Karen, though I didn't know her name at first, just the way she looked at my balcony gave her identity away before I ever heard a single word come out of her mouth. It was early April when I noticed her. I was pruning a few dead leaves off my basil when I saw movement across the courtyard. A woman, maybe her late 50s, hair pulled tight into a severe bun, standing just inside her sliding glass door. Arms crossed, watching. I gave a small wave. She didn't wave back. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe she didn't see me. Maybe she was just staring into space. Who knows? People are weird sometimes. I didn't think much of it, but she kept showing up. Every morning when I watered the plants. Every evening when I lit a small citronella candle and read outside. Always the same spot. Always the same posture. Just watching. No smile. No wave. Just stillness. Like a statue that hated greenery. One afternoon, I caught her outside for the first time. I had just stepped back inside to refill my watering can when I heard a voice. "Excuse me." I turned, and there she was, leaning over her own railing. "Do you really need that many plants?" It wasn't a question as much as it was an accusation. I laughed, awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. Yeah, I guess I do. They make me happy." She gave a tight, almost condescending smile. "Well, they're starting to become a bit of an eyesore. Just so you know." And with that, she walked back inside. That was the first time I felt it, the tension. It was so subtle but sharp, like a thread being pulled tight somewhere behind my back. The next few days, I noticed small changes. Someone had moved one of my potted plants a few inches, like they tried to tip it over, but gave up. My mail was late. I found a flyer from a pest control company stuck in my screen door, circled with a note scribbled in red ink. "Attracting bugs isn't a good look for the community." I started to realize it wasn't just coincidence. Another week passed, and then came the noise complaints. Not from my stereo or late-night guests. No, the complaint was officially filed through building management, stating that the sound of watering at odd hours was disruptive to neighbors. Watering. I didn't even use a hose, just a small jug. Quiet, controlled, harmless. When I asked the property manager who filed it, they hesitated. "We're not supposed to say, but she's new. Third floor corner unit." "Karen," they paused. "You didn't hear that from me." I felt it then, the paranoia creeping in like smoke under a door. I started checking my locks twice. I stopped leaving my watering can outside. I even took down the hanging chimes I loved because I was afraid she'd file another complaint. One evening, I heard her outside again, talking to someone loudly on the phone, though the only real part one caught was her saying, "This place has started to look like a jungle. It's disgusting. If I wanted to live in a greenhouse, I'd move to the Amazon." I knew she meant me. Still, I tried to rise above it. I told myself maybe she was just one of those people who need something to hate. Maybe if I didn't react, she'd get bored. But something in my gut said otherwise. It wasn't boredom I saw on her face. It was focus, precision. Like this was more than irritation. Like she needed to control things. In my little garden, it was something she couldn't touch. Not yet. That realization made me more protective. I started taking pictures of my plants every morning just to document their condition. I invested in a small motion-activated light. I began keeping receipts for soil, fertilizer, seeds, like I need to prove something. And slowly, the joy I used to feel on that balcony started to slip away. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, aching erosion. The way anxiety replaces excitement. The way suspicion creeps into routines you once loved. But I wasn't ready to give it up. Not yet. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't just about plants. This was about someone who thought she could erase things she didn't like. Someone who believed her opinion was law. And if she was preparing for war, she'd soon learn that I was far more stubborn than she ever imagined. It wasn't long before the complaints started rolling in. The first one came folded in half, slipped carefully under my door like it was some sort of formal notice from a secret authority. The paper was plain white, no envelope, and the handwriting was sharp, all in uppercase. Your plants are dropping debris into the air vents. This is a health concern. Please remove them immediately. A concerned neighbor. I stared at it for a good 30 seconds, then laughed out loud. Debris? Air vents? I lived on the top floor, my balcony a good 10 feet away from any kind of intake or shared duct. There was no logic to it, no real complaint, just veiled hostility. Still, I ignored it, tossed the note in the trash, and kept watering. The next time I saw her, Karen wasn't trying to hide her surveillance anymore. She stood outside her sliding door with a cup of tea, watching me again, eyes unblinking. I could feel the weight of her stare pressing into my neck as I trimmed the dead leaves off a pepper plant. I glanced up, gave her a nod. Nothing, just that stiff, eerie stillness. Later that week, I got a call from building management. A soft-voiced woman named Lindsay informed me that someone had filed a complaint about the unauthorized use of gardening equipment on the premises. I nearly choked. "I'm sorry," I said. "Gardening equipment?" She paused, clearly embarrassed. "Yes, they claimed you've been using tools that cause noise and could be hazardous. Like a watering can?" Another pause. She said there was a shovel involved. I looked down at the tiny, child-sized hand spade I used to fluff the soil. "Is this a joke?" "No, sir," she said, sounding exhausted. "I'm sorry. It's just protocol. We have to inform you whenever a formal complaint is logged." I thanked her and hung up. But now, the tension wasn't just an uncomfortable feeling in the air. It had a paper trail. Then came the smell accusation. Apparently, Karen had gone back to management to report that the aromatic plants on my balcony were creating a strong and nauseating odor that made it difficult to breathe. It was ridiculous. The only strong scent came from the small patch of lavender that I grew to keep mosquitoes away. But that didn't stop her from writing another handwritten letter. This time, she didn't even pretend it was anonymous. "You are creating an allergic hazard. Some people are highly sensitive. You are selfish and inconsiderate. Remove the plants or I will escalate this. Karen, Unit 3C." I kept that note. Something about the tone felt off. Too calculated. The way she underlined certain words. The way she framed it like a public service announcement, but dripping with disdain. Like she wasn't just angry. She believed she was right, and I was something to be corrected. Then, things got stranger. I started noticing that Karen was taking photos of my balcony from across the courtyard. Not casually, deliberately. Her phone angled directly toward my plants, snapping pictures at different times of the day. I once caught her zooming in from behind her curtain. I try not to react, but it made my skin crawl. It felt like she was building a case against me, documenting evidence for a crime that didn't exist. A few days later, the HOA got involved. Apparently, Karen had submitted a formal complaint to the Homeowners Association claiming my balcony garden was in violation of community aesthetic guidelines. Unregulated plant height, excessive foliage, unapproved use of exterior decor. That's how she worded it. A rep from the HOA showed up with a clipboard. I invited her inside, walked her to the balcony, and let her see for herself. She looked around for all of 2 minutes and said, "This is one of the nicest setups I've seen." She left with a smile, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. But Karen didn't let it go. She doubled down. The next morning, I found a small, rolled-up piece of newspaper tucked into one of my tomato pots. It was soaked, but inside was a handwritten message in that same angry scrawl. Gardens belong in backyards. This isn't a trailer park. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just dislike anymore. This was personal, aggressive, targeted. She wasn't trying to remove a few plants. She was trying to erase me, make me feel small, intrusive, like a contaminant in her perfect, sterile world. I debated confronting her, walking across the courtyard, knocking on her door, and asking what exactly her problem was. But something held me back. Her behavior didn't feel rational. It felt calculated, like she wanted a reaction, something she could twist and report. So I didn't give it to her. Instead, I did the only thing that made sense. I planted more. I added a row of hanging planters to the railing, filled them with bright petunias and marigolds. I started growing strawberries in vertical pockets on the wall. Every time I walked outside, I smiled just a little wider, not out of pettiness, but because I refused to shrink under her scrutiny. But she noticed, and she wasn't happy. One night, I returned home late to find my balcony hose cut clean in half. It hadn't torn or frayed. Someone had sliced it. Deliberately. I knew who it was. I didn't have proof. Not yet, but I could feel it in my bones. The next morning, another note. This one didn't even bother with politeness. You've been warned. Don't make this worse for yourself. That was the moment I realized this was no longer about plants or noise or smells. It was a control game. A woman so desperate to feel power that she picked a target and refused to let go. But what Karen didn't know was that I had just started preparing my own response. Quietly, carefully, because if she wanted a war, I wasn't going to fight it with words or threats. I was going to use the one thing she couldn't argue with, proof. And once I had it, she would never step outside the same way again. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped outside. It was still early, maybe just past 6:30 a.m. The air was cool, the lights soft and golden, the way it always is right before the city wakes up. But my balcony didn't feel like it used to. There was no scent of lavender, no flutter of the wind through the tomato leaves. Just silence and damage. The basil pot was shattered. The rosemary had been pulled straight out of the soil, roots exposed like torn nerves. My hanging strawberries were gone, the whole row of them missing, as if someone had yanked the hooks from the railing and disappeared into the night. I stood there, still holding my coffee, not quite processing what I was seeing. It was like walking into a crime scene, because that's exactly what it was. Dirt was everywhere, smeared across the floor, even on the wall. One of the ceramic planters had fallen sideways, rolled until it hit the balcony door. The lemon tree, which I had nurtured for months, had been tipped almost fully out of its pot. Its roots were exposed, dry, already beginning to darken. Someone had done this deliberately. I didn't even need to guess who. But what shocked me wasn't that Karen had escalated. It was the boldness of it. The message wasn't subtle anymore. It was loud, destructive, and intimate. She had crossed over from passive-aggressive threats to physical sabotage, and she did it while I slept just 20 feet away. I stepped over the mess, set my coffee down, and tried to breathe. Not out of fear, but fury. This wasn't just an attack on a hobby. This was an invasion, a violation of the one place I still had peace. After taking photos of everything, every broken pot, every clump of disturbed soil, I opened the camera feed from the night before. I had installed a small motion-activated camera on the upper corner of the balcony weeks ago, hidden behind a small wooden lattice panel. Up until now, it had only picked up pigeons and the occasional moth. But this time, it recorded exactly what I feared. At 2:13 a.m., the feed picked up a figure stepping onto my balcony from the fire escape. The figure was small, wrapped in a dark robe or coat. The footage was grainy, but there was no mistaking the outline of her frame. Even the way she moved, stiff, robotic, like someone who believed they were invisible. It was Karen. She moved fast, first to the rosemary, then to the strawberries. She didn't hesitate, like she'd planned it. At one point, she paused and looked up at the camera, or maybe just in its direction. And then she smiled. Not a full grin, just the corner of her mouth curled up like she thought she'd won. I saved the footage, backed it up to 3 drives, and emailed it to myself. Then I called building management. They sent someone up immediately. A building security officer named Raphael. Quiet guy, mid-30s, looked more tired than surprised when I showed him the video. "Yeah," he said, watching the screen. "That's definitely her. You're not the first." I looked up. "She's done this before?" "Not plants," he said, "but we've had reports. Someone's tires slashed 2 months ago. A bike knocked over. Another neighbor had trash dumped on their doorstep. We could never prove it, but everyone knew." I asked him why she was still living here if everyone knew she was the problem. He gave a slow shrug. "She's careful, quiet, and technically, she hasn't broken any major laws until now." That word, technically, stuck with me. How many people like her get away with things because they know exactly how far they can go without being caught? Not this time. I filed a police report that same morning. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making a line. A real, legal line that she couldn't cross without consequences. But Karen didn't lay low. If anything, she got louder. 2 days after the report, she approached me directly. First time she had ever spoken to me face-to-face since the "do you really need that many plants?" conversation. She waited by the mailboxes downstairs, holding a small bag of letters and staring like she'd been waiting for hours. When I walked past her, she stepped in front of me. "I know what you're trying to do," she said, her voice low and calm, too calm. "But people around here don't like tattletales. They like peace." I didn't say a word. I just looked her dead in the eyes. Her smile faltered. Then she leaned in and whispered, "Watch yourself." It was the first time I felt something more than annoyance. I felt genuine concern. Not because she was scary, but because she was unstable. And unstable people with grudges are dangerous. I went back upstairs, locked my door, and began documenting everything. Every interaction, every note, every conversation. I created a timeline, filed photos, video, and statement from neighbors. I wasn't going to be another tenant who just lived in fear until she moved out or found a new target. A week later, another note appeared, this time shoved directly under my windshield wiper. I hadn't even told her which car was mine, but somehow she knew. It was written in the same familiar script. "No one likes a rat. Maybe you should go garden somewhere else." The rage I felt was almost blinding, but I didn't act on it. I didn't confront her, didn't yell, didn't even respond. Because she wanted that reaction. She wanted to provoke something messy, emotional, uncontrollable. Instead, I gave a note to the officer handling the report. And then something changed. Neighbors, people who had been quiet or afraid or neutral, began to speak up. Word got around that Karen had been caught on camera. People started sharing their own stories. Someone admitted they'd seen her walking near my balcony the night of the incident. Another had watched her dump birdseed on someone's doormat weeks before. And slowly, Karen's grip on the building began to crack. But she wasn't done. Not yet. She still thought she had the upper hand. She had no idea that her own obsession had just dug the hole deeper. And by the time she realized how far she'd gone, it would be too late to climb out. It started with a single flash drive. I had labeled it Karen_01, not out of mockery, but because I knew this was only the beginning. On it, I placed everything. The 2:13 a.m. balcony footage, the broken hose, the photos of the torn basil, the screenshots of threatening notes. I sorted the evidence like an investigator, dates, timestamps, even neighbor testimonies she didn't know I had. But it wasn't just about documenting anymore. It was about reclaiming control, about standing in the silence between her threats and my resolve, and planting something stronger than fear. I scheduled a formal sit-down with the HOA, a rare in-person meeting that required a board quorum. They hadn't had one in months. I arrived with a printed binder, not just a USB. Physical proof, neatly organized. The same way she liked her letters folded and her balcony sterile. They let me speak first. I kept it calm. No emotion. Just facts. Each complaint I received, each time she called building management, every bit of escalation. I showed the videos. I handed them the photos. I quoted her notes verbatim. I even played a short audio file I had recorded the day she confronted me at the mailboxes. Her voice, clear as glass, whispering that eerie little threat. "Watch yourself." The room went quiet. Not a shock. Out of recognition. They'd heard about Karen for years. Whispers, rumors. But no one ever had the nerve or the documentation to challenge her like this. Then came the best part. I played footage from 2 other nights, both captured after the sabotage incident. In one, Karen appeared to be prowling the hallway just outside my door at 1 a.m. She didn't knock. She didn't speak. She just stood there for 4 full minutes, watching the peephole. The second clip showed her slipping what appeared to be a note under the door of another tenant who had recently spoken to me about her behavior. The note was never found, but the image, her shadow creeping down the hallway, bending low, sliding something underneath like poison, was enough to chill the room. They asked me what I wanted. I told them plainly, I want to feel safe in my home again. I want her to stop. There were murmurs. One board member leaned in, said, "We've had issues with her before, but nothing like this. You've built a case." A few days later, I received confirmation that the HOA had voted to issue a formal violation against her. 3, in fact. 1 for harassment, 1 for violating quiet hours, and 1 for trespassing on another resident's property, mine. It was an eviction. Not yet, but it was on her record. A red mark she couldn't erase. And then came the real strike. With the evidence in hand, the police updated the report from a general complaint to an active investigation. Vandalism and stalking. The detective assigned to the case, a tall, quiet man named Rowley, called me personally. He didn't say much, but I could hear the curiosity in his voice. "She's persistent," he said, "but she's sloppy. They always are, once they think no one's watching." I emailed him everything. He thanked me, said they'd be in touch. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking to every sound in the hallway. The feeling of being preyed upon had faded, replaced by something steadier, momentum. Karen, however, didn't take it quietly. She stopped pretending to be passive. No more fake smiles. No more subtlety. She glared now, full, raw hatred, every time we crossed paths. Once as I walked to my car, she stood behind her screen door and just hissed, like an animal. Not words, just noise, low and breathy. Another time, she knocked on a neighbor's door as I passed by, but never spoke to them. She just kept knocking over and over with her eyes locked on mine. She was unraveling, but that only made her more dangerous. That's when I got the idea for the second camera. I mounted it across from my own unit, tucked into a bookshelf near the window, angled just enough to capture the hallway beyond my door. I didn't trust her to stay on the balcony, and I was right. One night, around 3:11 a.m., the alert came through. Motion detected. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, checked the live feed. There she was, not at my door this time, but at my plants. She was on her own balcony, crouched low, a plastic container in her hand. At first, I couldn't tell what it was. Then I realized she was spraying something. Mist. Chemicals. She was targeting my plants from her side of the courtyard. A soft spray drifting across the divide. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I grabbed the footage, sent it directly to the detective, sent it to the HOA. I even saved a still frame and taped it to my own balcony door like a warning, not to her but to myself. A reminder, she doesn't stop, but neither will I. The next morning, the lemon tree's leaves were curling. The lavender was yellowing at the tips. My plants had absorbed whatever she sprayed, and they were responding. But now I had undeniable proof of malicious intent. That was the final piece. The HOA met again, and this time, they didn't just issue violations. They initiated a community-wide vote, a motion to suspend her residency privileges. No use of common areas, no exterior activity on balconies, and a public record of her behavior filed with the building. Karen was officially restricted. She couldn't even stand on her balcony without violating the terms. And the police? They finally acted. She was brought in for questioning. I wasn't told what she said, but I didn't need to know. Her silence, her absence for the next few days, told me everything. Karen had lost her power, and I had taken it without raising my voice once. The silence was different now. Before, it had been sharp, a waiting kind of silence, the type that made you check locks twice and glance at dark corners. But now it was heavy, hollow, like the sound that lingers after something breaks. Karen's balcony was empty. where there had once been a pristine row of sterile pots, her minimalist arrangement of succulents and stone bowls. Now, there was only dust and a single folding chair half collapsed, as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. The blinds behind her glass door remained shut day and night, sealed like a vault. No morning coffee, no sweeping, no watching, just absence. The building felt it too. Neighbors who had been cautiously polite before were suddenly friendly, almost too friendly. Small talk bloomed in the hallways like ivy in sunlight. Someone brought cookies upstairs. Another offered to help fix the broken railing near the stairwell. The tension that Karen had poured into the building for years was dissolving, and in its place was a strange, cautious optimism. But beneath it, there was a question. What happens to someone like her when they lose control? It started with the door slams. Sharp, sudden like thunderclaps. Not constant, but deliberate. A sound that pierced through drywall and echoed up the stairwell. No one ever saw her do it, but we knew. Karen wasn't gone. She was inside, stewing. Then came the pacing. You could hear it some nights, footsteps back and forth, from the kitchen to the bedroom, from the bedroom to the balcony door, then back again. Hours of it, like she was circling herself in the dark, trapped in a loop she couldn't exit. One night, I heard something different. Crying. Not loud, not theatrical, just a raw, brittle sound leaking through the wall that divided our units. Sobbing that started and stopped like a broken faucet. I didn't move. I just sat on the floor, listening, wondering if this was the first time she'd ever let herself break in front of anyone, even unknowingly. And for a brief, flickering moment, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Because what kind of person builds their identity on control, only to watch it unravel piece by piece? But pity is not forgiveness. Not when damage has been done. The restrictions the HOA placed on her behavior had begun to choke her. She could no longer water her balcony plants. No more quiet stalking at 2 a.m. No more passive-aggressive notes or whispered threats. Even the neighbors had started avoiding her in the mailroom. She was a pariah in her own building, visible but untouched like something poisonous. Then came the final unraveling. It happened on a Tuesday. I was leaving for work, backpack slung over one shoulder when I saw her standing in the lobby. She looked thinner, paler, not fragile exactly, just off. Her hair, usually pinned tight behind her ears, was loose, wiry. Her eyes were red. She wasn't alone. A woman stood beside her, mid-50s, sharply dressed, clipboard in hand. I would later learn she was from the property management company, sent to conduct a wellness check after Karen failed to respond to multiple violation letters and missed 2 rent payments. Karen didn't see me at first, but as I crossed the lobby, she turned. And I will never forget that look. It wasn't anger. It wasn't fear. It was something deeper. Recognition. Like she had finally seen herself reflected in the eyes of everyone else. And hated it. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Just a small, breathless motion, like she was trying to speak and couldn't find words that mattered anymore. The woman beside her touched her arm gently, guiding her toward the elevator. Karen didn't resist. She just followed, like someone being led through a fog she couldn't navigate alone. Later that day, an official notice was posted on the building's online bulletin board. Tenant in Unit 4B is under formal mental health review. Temporary residency restrictions remain in place pending further investigation. No one said it out loud, but we all knew what it meant. Karen was breaking down, and it wasn't a victory. It wasn't revenge or justice wrapped in a bow. It was just the end of a long, slow unraveling. The collapse of a person who had spent years building walls out of control, only to watch those walls come crashing down under the weight of their own actions. The next morning, her blinds were open. Not wide, but cracked. Enough to show movement inside. Not long after, 2 men arrived in a plain white van and entered her unit. They were there for nearly 2 hours. When they left, they carried out 2 boxes, a small suitcase, and a hanging basket that used to sit on her balcony rail. She didn't follow them. But that afternoon, a paper sign appeared on her door. Notice of temporary vacancy. Do not disturb. That night, the pacing stopped. The crying stopped. For the first time in weeks, everything was still. and the silence felt clean. Free. Karen was gone. Whether it was permanent or not, no one knew. Some speculated she'd been moved to a relative's place. Others thought she'd been placed in care. A few believed she'd simply fled, embarrassed, unable to face the consequences of her exposure. But I didn't care, because for the first time since planting that first basil seed, I could step onto my balcony, breathe in the scent of fresh soil, feel the wind touch the leaves, and know I had won. Not through violence, not through rage, but through truth, through quiet, persistent resistance. I had stood my ground, and the garden was still standing with me. Peace is not something that arrives with ceremony. It doesn't knock. It doesn't announce itself. It just begins like a breath you didn't know you were holding finally let go. At first, I didn't trust the quiet. Even after Karen disappeared, even after the blinds stayed closed and her door remained undisturbed for weeks, I still caught myself hesitating at the threshold of my balcony. I'd step out and look left instinctively, half expecting to see her behind the glass, watching me like a hawk disguised as a neighbor. I'd water my plants quickly at first, always glancing over my shoulder, waiting for the soft click of her door or the scrape of a chair being dragged in protest. But it didn't come. Instead, something else began to grow. The lavender came back stronger than I expected. The basil, once wilted and brown from her sabotage, began to stretch upward again, reaching for the light like it never doubted it would. My lemon tree even sprouted 2 new buds. Small, pale things at first, but living. Unafraid, I started leaving the balcony door open in the mornings, letting the breeze drift through the living room, carrying with it the fresh scent of rosemary and soil. That earthy smell had always calmed me, but now it meant something more. It was proof, a sign that I had taken something ugly, something toxic, and not only survived it, but turned it into something beautiful. Neighbors noticed. They stopped more often to chat when passing by. One even asked me for cuttings. "You've got magic in those hands," she said. I laughed, but I knew it wasn't magic. It was persistence, and a refusal to be pushed into silence. Still, peace wasn't perfect. There were nights when I'd lie in bed and replay it all. The notes, the looks, the way her words would slide under my skin like cold blades. The footage, the tension of gathering proof, of becoming an unwilling detective in my own home. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't fought back, if I just moved out like others before me. Let her win. But then I'd think about the look on her face that last day in the lobby, the emptiness, the loss, and I'd realize the story had ended exactly as it needed to. Not with a scream, not with a spectacle, but with truth, with facts that couldn't be erased, and with her own darkness finally laid bare. Even so, something had shifted inside me. Before all this, I had trusted the illusion that being quiet meant being safe, that minding your business would earn you privacy and peace. But Karen proved otherwise. Sometimes the loudest threats come dressed in routine, in clipped smiles, in polite notes left just so. I kept the flash drive, not out of fear, out of memory, a reminder of what I endured and what I overcame. I don't check it often, but it sits in the drawer beneath my desk, inside the same binder I used to present to the HOA. On the spine, I've scribbled the word roots, because that's what this story really became about. Not conflict, not surveillance, not even plans. It was about roots, about where I draw my strength from, about what I choose to nourish and what I choose to pull out and cast aside. Eventually, the unit next to mine went up for rent. A quiet couple moved in, early 30s, dog lovers, kind eyes. They introduced themselves with banana bread and a handshake. I hesitated when they asked about the previous tenant. I could see they were curious, maybe even a little nervous. They'd heard things, surely. The walls in this place are thin when it counts. But I just smiled and said, "It's peaceful now. You'll love it here." Because they didn't need her story. They were planning their own. Every so often, I still find myself glancing across the balcony, out of habit more than fear. The empty chair is gone now. The new neighbors filled her space with wind chimes and a fern. I hear laughter there sometimes. Music, life, and I let it in. But even as peace returned, something else stayed with me. A quiet lesson wrapped in tension and dirt. That vigilance isn't paranoia. That kindness isn't weakness. that standing your ground doesn't require shouting. It just requires truth held steady long enough for others to see it. I think about Karen sometimes, not with anger, not even pity anymore, just clarity. She was a storm, and I survived her. Not because I fought like she did, but because I rooted myself deeper. The plants helped, yes, but it was never just about the plants. It was about claiming space, about protecting something I loved from someone who couldn't bear to see things grow where she felt nothing but control. Now, when I tend to my balcony, I take my time. I prune with care. I water slowly. I talk to the plants in a soft voice, sometimes without realizing I'm doing it. And every leaf that turns toward the sun feels like a silent affirmation. You're safe now. Not because the danger disappeared, but because I didn't. Because I stayed. Because I fought for my little patch of green in a concrete cage, and I won. And that, more than anything, is a story worth remembering.